Right, back with another quick vid. This one's quite a biggie, so it's going to be a bit longer than usual. This time we'll be looking at anti-landing obstacles. So whenever these pop up online, they are always said to be anti-glider ditches, poles, whatever. And this is something that annoys me really more than it should, but it's something that needs to be addressed. So here's like the definitive video on anti-landing obstacles, not anti-glider obstacles. So during the Second World War, a range of methods were used to deny areas of land that could be used for landing within proximity of vulnerable points. These included concrete posts, such as this photo here, ditches, old cars, as we saw in the previous image, old signposts, concrete pipes, gantries of cable, and a range of other obstacles that were stuck in fields to deny them to enemy aircraft. So were these obstacles designed to stop gliders landing? As always with this, the short answer is no. The invasion of the lowland countries showed that transport aircraft, primarily the Junkers Ju-52, were key to dropping paratroopers and bringing in supplies to paratroopers that had captured airfields. And although we know the Germans used gliders to capture urban and mail forts, the home forces showed a very different focus when it came to defending open fields from air landing. So let's see what the documents tell us. So on the 14th of September 1940, this document was issued by 2 Corps, focusing on the obstruction of landing grounds. So 2 Corps was the corps responsible for defending a large area of Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire and Bedfordshire, so most of East Anglia during 1940 onwards. Attached to this document is this leaflet, and this is a leaflet produced by the various arms of the British military, including the War Office, Admiralty and Air Ministry. The leaflet is handily titled "The Obstruction of Landing Grounds Suitable for Enemy Aircraft," and this provides the baseline guidance for obstructing land, as well as outlining the key threats from the air in terms of invasion. So just to hit one thing on the head first off, it was outlined within this leaflet that the responsibility for obstructing ground was that of the RAF if the area was within 5 miles of an airfield, and it was the responsibility of the army if the land to be obstructed was within 5 miles of a vulnerable port, viable beaches for landing and civilian airports, not the Home Guard. So just to hit that on the head straight off. Section 7 of this leaflet makes it very clear what the key threat was and what obstacles were required to prevent against the landing of and taking off of German troop carrying aircraft. So the mention here is specifically to the Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft. This description also mentions that such aircraft can land and take off in a distance of not less than 400 yards, which is about 365 metres, and 500 yards, which is 457 metres, if taxiing was to be undertaken. Note here that there is no mention at all of gliders, and the focus is solely on powered transport aircraft. It's also worth pointing out here as well that the slope of a field as well was important, as if a slope of a field was too much, an aircraft couldn't actually land as well, so that was something that was also taken into account. Section 8 of this, it's about a 4-page leaflet. So Section 8 of this leaflet goes into further detail of the requirements for areas of space to be obstructed to deny enemy aircraft the ability to land and take off. With areas of field that were rectangular with sides of around 500 yards and with clear approaches to be considered the most vulnerable to landing of aircraft. Secondary to this were fields 500 yards long and 100 yards wide were to be considered the next vulnerable, and roads 90 feet or more wide with straight lengths of 500 yards were also required to be obstructed. And this is something that we see going on from the documentary photographs, for example. We see all these areas widely obstructed. Right, Section 9. So Section 9 and 10 outline the rationale of obstruction and methods of obstruction. It is noted that German troop carrying aircraft, so again aircraft not gliders, are particularly robust and that pilots may risk minor crashes if it allows them to land their troops and equipment. It is also highlighted that given the large amount of space and lack of available labour, it is not possible to obstruct every area in such a way that enemy aircraft attempting to land would be destroyed and the passengers and crew killed. So the focus should be on arranging obstacles to make it impossible to land without damage and certain that the aircraft will be unable to take off again. So again, this is all focusing on powered transport aircraft, not gliders. The obstacles suggested would ensure that a large portion of the invading force would be wrecked on landing, ensuring that they could not be reused to continue bringing in troops and supplying them. So knocking the aircraft out as soon if they do attempt to land, and then this would further obstruct the areas of land that they've tried to land in. So obstacles recommended to deny these areas of land included solid obstructions of concrete blocks, such as and including piles of debris and concrete pipes filled with gravel, posts and stakes with a minimum diameter of 10 inches firmly fixed into the ground at a height of 6 feet, with posts spaced 10 yards apart, or if they were 12 feet high, posts were to be spaced 30 yards apart. And also trees could be felled and dragged into fields to obstruct them. So not just physical obstacles, man-made obstacles or human-made obstacles, but trees as well could be felled to obstruct landing grounds. Also, we see haystacks could be used, and as well as wire obstacles. So gantries of wire erected across like top of roads and fields were something that was used. And then we come to the well-known anti-landing trenches, sometimes referred to as anti-landing ditches, not anti-glider ditches. So these consisted of a chessboard of trenches arranged with sides 150 yards, so essentially big squares, checkerboard pattern. And these trenches were to consist of the trench and a mound of earth. So not just the trench itself, but also an associated mound of earth, with the trench measuring 4 feet wide and 3 feet 6 inches deep, being able to create a mound of earth being 10 feet long and 3 feet high. These obstacles were deployed in one form or another across the UK, but today are seen as anti-glider obstacles when, as you can see from the official guidance, they weren't. So, was the threat of gliders actually considered? Well, it was, but so far I've found no evidence that methods of physical defence were constructed to stop gliders from being landed. So, according to 2 Division, which was responsible for defending East Yorkshire in mid to late 1940, the threat of gliders was initially shrugged off in this intelligence summary number 106. So it's said here that, you know, under conditions of the RAF been present and RAF fighters been present, gliders were unable to stand up to, you know, 8 machine guns primarily. So in terms of air superiority, you know, the threat of gliders on the 15th of July 1940 was shrugged off by the 2nd Division, and gliders at this time were not being seen as a major issue. So by late July, the threat appears to have actually been reconsidered by the 2nd Division, as highlighted in this later intelligence summary, which was issued on the 31st of July 1940. So it was noted here that a glider can land pretty much anywhere. So this is hinting that trying to stop them landing isn't possible, or that's how I interpret this. So this assessment focuses again on the fear that an airfield could be captured, then used to bring in troop-carrying aircraft, with gliders being used to land armed troops of up to about 100. So this was a key threat. If you've watched my other videos, my video on the invasion threat series, the key fear in particular in 1939 and 1940 was that the enemy would land, try and capture an airfield and try to capture a port. And this is reflected here in this consideration of gliders. So you'll notice here that it mentions that the focus is not necessarily on stopping the gliders from landing at all, but it's being prepared to attack a body of about 100 troops that have been landed by gliders. There is no mention here of stopping gliders landing through physical obstacles. It's also worth noting that this assessment also points out that a glider force is vulnerable to fighters during the day, but could easily be detected due to the low speed of the aircraft at night. So it's surmised here that it's more likely that due to air superiority of fighters, that gliders would be landed, if they are to be used, at night. But there is no provision here to ensure that they are stopped landing through obstacles. So by September, the 2nd Division had again considered the threat of gliders and their practical use for invasion. So this summary here even cites Ebony Mail. So this was the use of gliders to attack the Belgian fort during the invasion of the lowland countries, which had taken place a couple of months before. But here it is concluded that there is no confirmation that the German Air Force has gliders in large numbers, therefore suggesting that the threat of gliders was unlikely. So, Coming to the end, the moral of the story. Why is all this important? Well, for me, getting terminology right, and from a historical perspective, getting the terminology right and ensuring historical accuracy in terms of the use of the defences is vitally important, as it helps to ensure the true story of the situation is told, especially in regards to the defence of the UK, and making sure it is told right. Using the right terminology helps to avoid the creation of myths, such as that of the use of obstacles to prevent gliders landing. There is no evidence to suggest that obstacles were built to stop gliders landing, and the intelligence assessments available appear to confirm that nothing could really be done to stop them landing. The Home Force's primary concern was the landing of power transport aircraft, in particular the Junkers 52, and this also highlights that the concern was that enemy transport aircraft could be used to keep an isolated inland force supplied from the air and continue that force being a threat behind the lines, which would disrupt troops, also capture vital airfields that the defenders would need, and also these enemy troops could be used to capture a port for the use of seaborne forces, which is something that was highlighted in the Julius Caesar plan in my previous videos. So the myth of the anti-glider obstacle is a primary example of how post-war misinterpretation and misperception based on other wartime events, tied in with a lack of research, has led to the creation of a fictional subgenre of anti-invasion defences. This is also tied in with a habit for people to repeat such myths online while making no attempt to actually corroborate this information that has been repeated with a primary source. So I've clearly shown here, using primary sources, that this is a myth. So the use of gliders during the Second World War has clearly grabbed people's attention, but in the case of the UK's anti-invasion defences, the focus on gliders is clearly ahistorical. The attacks on Ebony Mail and later Pegasus Bridge, for example, show how important glider attack can be as part of an invasion, but it also shows how difficult it is to protect against gliders being landed, because they could be landed in such a small area, and even be landed in areas that are also heavily obstructed. This has influenced people so much that defending against gliders was in reality actually particularly difficult, and the use of obstacles to obstruct their landing clearly wasn't a concern of the Home Forces, and their reaction was to devise a range of obstacles to counter the landing and taking off of powered aircraft, not gliders. So with this information now presented, I'm sure it'll be countered with no actual evidence and opinion only, but the primary sources I've consulted from September 1940 and prior to this clearly show that the military's own guidance on preventing the landing of enemy aircraft focuses solely on transport aircraft, primarily the Junkers Ju-52, and it makes no mention of gliders whatsoever. And as always, this is what the documents tell us, and I know it's very easy to come up with hypotheticals and what ifs, but doing so doesn't counter the fact that the various forms of physical defence built by the Home Forces were built to stop transport aircraft and not gliders. The information I've found and presented relating to gliders shows how vulnerable they would be during daylight, especially to fighters and most likely anti-aircraft fire as well, and that landing by gliders was determined to be something that would only be attempted during the night. The documents themselves make no recommendation for preventing gliders landing, as it's likely this was seen as not possible given that they can land pretty much anywhere. So there's also the fact as well that if areas of land were to be obstructed to the landing of gliders, so much land would need to be obstructed that farming would be affected negatively, which is something that is kind of highlighted in the leaflet as well, and one of the reasons why the Ministry for Agriculture was consulted in its creation. So the method of countering gliders in the consulted documents appears to be rather non-committal from what I've seen so far, suggesting that defence efforts should focus on tracking the gliders before and after launch and preparing to attack the force of paratroopers or glider-borne troops that have been landed on the ground, rather than trying to take them out before they'd landed or while they were trying to land. So later assessments, intelligence assessments, conclude that the enemy hadn't actually built enough gliders to be used in the invasion of the UK as well, which is rather interesting. So just to finish off and kind of cover my own backside here, if you can find a period document or a primary source like those that I've presented in this video which shows that anti-landing obstacles were built to take on gliders, I'd love to see it, and I'll be sat here waiting patiently to see that. So thank you for watching and goodbye.